He asked for one thing, one photo. "Show me the photograph," Earl Sutton said, calm as a man who has fixed his own machines his whole life. Kyle Brennan didn't argue. He didn't get loud. He just stared at the tablet in his hands like it might save him. "Mr. Sutton," he said, voice careful, "I don't have a photograph." And that was the moment the whole day turned. Earl was 67, the kind of farmer who could tell you the sound of a bearing going bad before anyone else heard it. The kind who drove 40 minutes from his place outside Parsons, Tennessee, to the authorized John Deere dealership in Lexington without thinking twice because it was a simple appointment, a routine hydraulic inspection they'd recommended at his last service, covered fully under the extended warranty he'd paid good money for. He'd shown up early, windows down, nothing dramatic in his mind except getting back home with daylight to spare. He sat in the waiting area for 2 hours, bad coffee, old farm magazine, the usual noises of a dealership, phones, doors, a mechanic rolling a cart across concrete, until Kyle Brennan walked in at 11:15 with that expression Earl recognized immediately. The face of a man about to deliver something rehearsed and hoping the rehearsal holds. "Mr. Sutton," Kyle said, "we've completed the inspection and I need to discuss some findings with you." Earl nodded once. He expected, "You're good to go," or "We'll order a part," the normal stuff. Kyle sat across from him, turned the tablets so Earl could see, and set it straight. "Our technician has identified evidence of unauthorized modification to your hydraulic control system, specifically an aftermarket pressure valve that is not an approved John Deere component." Earl didn't blink. He looked at the screen, then at Kyle. "That's not correct," he said. Kyle didn't flinch either. "Mr. Sutton, our technician documented it. It's in the inspection report." Earl's voice stayed even. "Your technician documented something that isn't there." Kyle's tone tightened a fraction, still polite, still corporate. "I understand you might be surprised, but the documentation is clear." Earl leaned back, not angry, not loud, just exact. "I want to see the component. Show me the valve." Kyle's eyes flicked down to the tablet. "The system has already been reassembled following inspection." Earl's head tilted slightly, as if he was making sure he heard right. "Then show me a photograph of the component before reassembly." That's when Kyle hit the wall. "The technician's notes described the finding in detail," he said. Earl didn't move. "That is not what I asked. I asked for a photograph." Kyle breathed in and out like he was choosing which words wouldn't get him in trouble. "Mr. Sutton, I don't have a photograph." The waiting area went quiet in that particular way where you don't need anyone to say that's a lie for both sides to understand exactly what just happened. Kyle kept going because stopping would have meant admitting something. "Based on this finding," he said, "we are required to flag your warranty for review, and the review may result in warranty revocation for the affected systems." Earl watched him for a long second, then stood up. "I want a copy of that inspection report." Kyle printed it. Earl folded it carefully and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket like it mattered, because it did. He walked out, got into his truck, and drove the 40 minutes back to his farm without calling anyone, without blowing up, without doing the thing people expect in stories like this. He just went straight to the barn and checked the hydraulic system on his 2017 John Deere 6130 R himself. Not because he needed to learn what it looked like, because he already knew. He'd owned the machine 2 years. He maintained it himself. He knew what was stock and what wasn't, and he knew that nobody had been inside that system except him and the people he'd paid to do regular service. He took his time, and he found exactly what he expected. No aftermarket valve, no unauthorized component, nothing. The original John Deere hydraulic setup, the same as it had always been. Earl stood there looking at it for a while, not confused, not doubting himself, just letting the reality settle. A dealership had written down something that wasn't true, and they were willing to put his warranty at risk over it. He went inside, put the inspection report in the top drawer of his desk, and made lunch like the world hadn't shifted. The warranty revocation notice arrived by certified mail 8 days later. A formal document from John Deere's Warranty Administration Department, citing the dealer's inspection findings as the basis for revoking coverage on Earl's hydraulic system and related components. It wasn't a vague threat anymore. It was official. It meant money, and not theoretical money. Earl's 6130R had developed a minor but progressive hydraulic leak he'd been watching for 3 weeks. The whole point of bringing it in was to get ahead of it under warranty, the way you do when you've paid for extended coverage. Without that coverage, the number Kyle had dropped at the end of their conversation, almost like an afterthought, was now a real estimate for $1,200. Earl didn't have to guess whether he was being treated unfairly. He had the receipts, the letter, the inspection report, in his own eyes. He didn't have to imagine what that leak would do if it got worse in the middle of a busy stretch. He'd lived long enough to know exactly how quickly a small problem becomes a season problem when equipment goes down. Earl carried the revocation notice to his desk and set it beside the inspection report, then opened the drawer and pulled out something else Kyle Brennan hadn't known existed. The original dealer inspection report from when Earl purchased the extended warranty 2 years earlier. That report documented every component of the hydraulic system in detail and confirmed it was entirely stock at the time the warranty was written. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a feeling. It was paper. It meant the current finding wasn't just maybe wrong. It was demonstrably false. And the difference between those two documents told one story no matter how you try to dress it up. Someone had written a report to avoid paying a warranty claim, and the benefit of that avoidance went to the dealership. Earl sat at his kitchen table with both reports in front of him and the certified letter open and flat. Most people in that moment would do one of 3 things: call a customer service line and get lost in menus, hire an attorney, or explode online. Earl did none of those. He didn't rush because rushing makes you sloppy. He didn't call people he couldn't see because he'd spent a lifetime understanding that the real decisions in his world weren't made in corporate offices or on hold with a hotline. They were made between neighbors who knew your name and knew your history and knew whether your word meant anything. Earl's reputation was not something he said out loud. It was something other men carried for him because he'd carried it the same way for them, year after year, in small, steady ways. Showing up when somebody's baler broke down, lending a trailer, helping fix a fence after a storm, not keeping score, not bragging. He took 3 days and thought about what to do the way he thought about everything important, slowly, from multiple angles, until the right direction became obvious. And what became obvious wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a social media campaign. It was leverage, but not the kind people in cities think of. It was the leverage of a network built over decades where a man's name still had weight and where getting wrong didn't just stay between you and the company if you didn't let it. On Thursday evening, Earl picked up his phone and called his neighbor Gerald Ford, who farmed 400 acres along Earl's north fence line and had known him for 39 years. When Gerald answered, Earl didn't dramatize it. He didn't embellish. He didn't ask for sympathy. He said, "Gerald, I need to tell you something that happened." Gerald said, "All right." Earl told him plainly and completely. The dealership in Lexington, the inspection called Brennan's tablet, the claim of an aftermarket pressure valve, the fact that there was no photo, the certified letter revoking his warranty, the $4,200 repair estimate, and the 2-year-old inspection report proving the system had been stock when the warranty was written. He didn't accuse anyone by name beyond the people involved. He didn't threaten. He just laid out the sequence like a man reading a list of parts. When he finished, Gerald was quiet, the kind of quiet that means he's not deciding whether he believes you. He's deciding what to do about it. Then Gerald asked one question. "Who else knows?" Earl said, "Nobody yet." Gerald asked the next question like it mattered more. "Who do you want to know?" Earl looked down at the papers in front of him, the lie and the proof sitting side by side, and he said one word. "Everybody." Gerald didn't say calm down. He didn't say maybe it was a mistake. He didn't say, "Did you call customer service?" He said, "I'll make some calls tonight." Earl didn't thank him with a speech. He just said, "I'd appreciate that," and hung up. Gerald Ford did not make dramatic calls, and he did not make many. That was the first thing that mattered. Men like Gerald understood something younger people sometimes forgot. The first 7 calls determine everything that follows. Too many calls, and the story becomes noise. The wrong calls, and the story dies before it spreads. So Gerald sat at his kitchen table that Thursday night with his old address book open and made exactly 7 calls. Not 10, not 20, 7. The first man he called was Pete Caswell, who who farmed outside Lexington and had been buying equipment from the same John Deere dealership for nearly 20 years. Pete picked up on the third ring. Gerald didn't waste time warming up the conversation. "Pete," he said, "Earl Sutton's warranty just got revoked over a modification that doesn't exist." Pete didn't interrupt. Gerald explained the whole thing the same way Earl had explained it to him. The inspection, the aftermarket valve claim, the missing photograph, the certified letter, the $4,200 repair estimate, and the original inspection report from 2 years earlier, showing the system was stock. When Gerald finished, Pete asked the same question Gerald had asked Earl. "You sure about the paperwork?" Gerald said, "Earl still has it." Pete went quiet for a moment, then said something simple. "That's not right." Gerald said, "Oh." Pete didn't suggest writing a letter or filing a complaint. He said, "Who else knows?" Gerald said, "A few will soon." Pete answered, "I'll make some calls." Gerald hung up and moved to the next name. The second call went to Raymond Hollis, who farmed outside Scotts Hill and had a reputation for showing up when someone needed help, not when it was convenient. Raymond listened the whole way through without interrupting. When Gerald finished, Raymond asked only one thing. "Earl have the report from when he bought the warranty?" Gerald said yes. Raymond's answer came immediately. "Then this isn't complicated." He paused, then added, "I'll talk to a couple people." The third call went to Harold Simmons outside Lexington, a man who had purchased 3 John Deere machines from that same dealership. Harold had dealt with their service department enough times to understand exactly how warranty inspections worked and exactly how much discretion technicians sometimes had. Gerald told him the story in the same order. The claim, the missing photo, the revocation letter, the documentation proving the system had been stock. Harold didn't sound angry. He sounded certain. "They know better than that," he said quietly. Gerald said, "I thought you'd want to know." Harold said, "I do." Then he said something that would matter later. "I'll call the dealership tomorrow." The fourth call went to a farmer in Chester County who ran a large soybean operation and knew nearly everyone in 2 counties simply because farming forces you to know people. Gerald didn't need to ask him to pass the story along. He said, "I'll let some folks know." The fifth call went to a cattle farmer who had borrowed equipment from early years earlier during a difficult season and had never forgotten it. When Gerald finished explaining the situation, the man said, "That doesn't sound like Earl." Gerald said, "It doesn't." The sixth call went to a man in Henderson County who kept track of everything happening in the local farming network, simply because people trusted him with information. When Gerald explained the situation, the man wrote down the details in a small notebook before saying he would make a few calls in the morning. The seventh and final call Gerald made that night went to someone who rarely spoke much at all, but who everyone listened to when he did. Gerald finished the story and waited. The man said nothing for a moment, then asked, "Earl say he didn't touch that system?" Gerald said, "He said it never had an aftermarket part." The man answered, "Then we'll see." Gerald closed the address book after that call and went to bed. What happened next didn't happen because anyone organized it formally. It happened because networks built over decades behave in predictable ways when the information moving through them is trusted. By Friday morning, the story had already moved beyond Gerald's original 7 calls. Pete Caswell called 2 men before breakfast. One of them called his brother in another county, who called a neighbor who happened to know someone else who had worked on equipment with Earl years earlier. Raymond Hollis told 3 farmers he trusted while fueling his tractor at a supply stop. Harold Simmons did exactly what he had said he would do. He called the dealership in Lexington Friday afternoon and asked to speak with the service manager. When the manager came on the line, Harold said calmly, "I want you to know I'm aware of what happened to Earl Sutton's warranty." The service manager answered with the careful language people use when they realize they might be speaking into a situation bigger than expected. "I'm not able to discuss another customer's account." Harold said, "I'm not asking you to." The manager paused. Harold continued, "I'm telling you that a lot of people are becoming aware of it." The manager tried to hold the line. "Mr. Simmons, I don't know what you've heard, but our inspection process is thorough and accurate." Harold didn't raise his voice. "Earl Sutton has the original inspection report from when he purchased the warranty 2 years ago," he said. "It documents the hydraulic system as entirely stock." That sentence changed the temperature of the conversation. The manager went quiet. Harold let the silence sit for a moment before adding one more line. I thought you might want to know that before Monday morning. Then he hung up. By Friday afternoon, the story had reached more than 24 farmers across 4 counties. Nobody exaggerated the facts because exaggeration ruins credibility in small communities. The story traveled clean. A dealership said Earl modified his machine. They had no photograph to prove it. They revoked his warranty anyway, and Earl had paperwork proving the machine was stock when the warranty was written. That was enough. By Saturday morning, 43 farmers had heard the story. Not through social media, not through a newspaper, but through direct conversations between people who knew one another personally. When one man told another, the first question was always the same. You sure about Earl? And the answer was always the same, too. It's Earl Sutton. That was explanation enough. Because if you knew Earl, you knew he didn't cheat on equipment, he didn't cut corners, and he didn't invent stories about businesses unless something real had happened. So the story kept moving. Saturday afternoon, the number reached 60. Nobody was keeping an official list. The count existed only because men kept calling back through the same network to say some version of the same sentence. I'll be there. The phrase started appearing in conversations, even though nobody had formally proposed a plan yet. One farmer said it first without realizing what it would become. When Raymond Hollis explained the situation to a neighbor, the neighbor said, "If Earl needs people there, I'll be there." Raymond didn't correct him because the idea already made sense. The next call used the same words. "I'll be there." Soon people started asking the obvious follow-up. Where? That was when the location began to take shape. It wouldn't be the dealership in Lexington because that building was too small and too far from the regional decision-makers. The place that mattered was the John Deere Regional Service Center on Highway 70 in Jackson, Tennessee, the facility responsible for processing warranty claims across the entire region. If someone wanted the problem acknowledged at the level where it could actually be fixed, that was where the message had to be delivered. By Saturday evening, the idea had become clear enough that nobody needed to explain it anymore. Farmers from Henderson, Decatur, Chester, and Madison County started calling each other not to ask whether something should happen, but to coordinate when they would arrive. The timing was simple. The Regional Service Center opened at 7:30 Tuesday morning. That meant anyone serious about being noticed would have to arrive earlier, which meant leaving home while it was still dark. But getting up before sunrise was not a problem for farmers. It was routine. By Sunday afternoon, the story had reached 84 farmers. Not because someone targeted that number, but because that was how many people heard the story and independently decided the same thing. Earl Sutton had been treated unfairly, and the right response was to show up where the decision had been made and make sure the people responsible understood the size of the mistake. No speeches, no signs, just presence. On Monday evening, the last few calls went out confirming the time. One farmer asked another, "You heading to Jackson in the morning?" The answer came back before daylight. Another man said, "What are we bringing?" The reply was obvious. Tractors. Because if a farmer wants to be heard by a company that sells farm equipment, the language they understand best is the machines themselves. So across 4 counties that night, alarms were set earlier than usual. Fuel tanks were checked. Engines were warmed briefly and then shut off again until morning. Nobody made announcements. Nobody called the news. The plan was simple. Drive to the Regional Service Center before it opened and stand there until someone listened. And somewhere in Parsons, Tennessee, Earl Sutton went to bed without knowing exactly how many people would arrive the next morning, only knowing that Gerald had said he would make some calls and that in the kind of community Earl had spent 40 years building relationships in, sometimes that was all it took. The first tractor arrived at the John Deere Regional Service Center on Highway 70 before the sky had even started to lighten. Raymond Hollis rolled in at 5:47 in the morning, engine humming steady after a 40-mile drive through dark Tennessee backroads. He didn't honk. He didn't make a show of it. He just pulled the 2014 John Deere 7290 across the entrance gate, parked it sideways, shut the engine down, and sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel. Raymond wasn't waiting for instructions. He already knew exactly why he was there. 3 days earlier, Pete Caswell had called and told him about Earl Sutton's warranty being revoked over a modification that didn't exist. Pete had explained the missing photograph, the inspection report, the $4,200 repair estimate, and the 2-year-old document proving Earl's machine had been stock when the warranty was written. Raymond had listened the whole way through and then said one sentence: "Tell Earl I'll be there." Now he was. The second and third tractors arrived together 17 minutes later. 2 farmers from Chester County who had driven part of the way side by side on the highway pulled into the service center driveway at 6:04, parked beside Raymond, and climbed down from their machines with the easy coordination of men who spent their lives moving heavy equipment around tight spaces. Nobody shook hands. Nobody asked if they were in the right place. They simply nodded to Raymond and stood near the tractors, waiting. By 6:15, another truck hauling a tractor on a trailer pulled in and unloaded near the gate. By 6:30, there were 19 machines positioned across the entrance area, arranged without discussion in a way that made it clear no car was going to drive through that gate when the building opened. The farmers stood beside their equipment in small groups, talking quietly about ordinary things. How late the corn harvest had run that year, how the weather had stayed warm longer than usual, how diesel prices had crept up again. Nobody was shouting about Earl Sutton. Nobody needed to. They all knew why they were there. At 6:45, headlights began appearing steadily on the road leading into the service center. More tractors, some driven straight down the highway, others arriving on trailers and being unloaded in the parking area before rolling forward to join the line. By 7 o'clock, the number had reached 43. Engines shut down one after another, the morning growing quieter as the machines stopped running. A few farmers leaned against their tires. Others stood with their hands in their jacket pockets. Some walked around briefly to stretch their legs after long drives. Nobody blocked traffic on the highway. Nobody yelled at passing cars slowing down to look. The tractors simply sat across every entrance to the building in calm, immovable rows. At 7:15, the sky had turned fully gray with morning light, and the number of tractors had climbed past 60. The first employees of the service center began turning into the driveway, expecting a normal Tuesday shift. The first car to arrive belonged to a parts clerk named Donna Waverly. She slowed as she approached the entrance, and then stopped completely when she realized the driveway was filled with tractors parked across the gate. For a moment, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then she noticed the farmers standing beside the machines, and the fact that none of the tractors were moving aside. Donna reached for her phone and called her manager before she had even finished processing the scene in front of her. By 7:30, when the regional service center officially opened for business, every entrance to the facility was blocked. 84 tractors now sat in front of the building. Not randomly, not scattered, positioned deliberately so that nothing larger than a bicycle could pass between them. The farmers didn't chant or hold signs. They simply stood there, quiet and patient. Inside the building, employees gathered near the windows looking out at the rows of machines filling the driveway and parking lot. Some recognized faces from nearby counties. Others didn't know any of them, but understood immediately that something serious had brought 84 farmers to the same place before sunrise. The regional manager, Tom Adcock, received Donna Waverly's call at 6:58 while he was still at home finishing his first cup of coffee. She described the situation quickly. Tractors, dozens of them, blocking the service center entrance. Tom didn't waste time asking how many. The tone of her voice told him it was more than a small group. He grabbed his jacket, got into his SUV, and drove to the facility in 11 minutes. When Tom turned into the road leading to the service center, he slowed immediately. The tractors were visible from the highway now, lined across the entrance like a wall of green machines. He parked along the edge of the driveway and stepped out, scanning the crowd. No shouting, no arguments, just farmers standing beside their equipment like they had decided to wait as long as necessary. Tom walked forward slowly, phone still in his hand, trying to figure out who was in charge of the gathering. That was when he noticed the pickup truck pulling onto the highway shoulder at 7:42. Earl Sutton stepped out and closed the driver's door quietly. He hadn't driven a tractor to Jackson. That hadn't been the point. The tractors belonged to the men who had chosen to come. Earl simply walked across the pavement toward the service entrance where Tom Adcock stood looking over the situation. Earl stopped a few feet away and said, "Good morning." Tom studied him for a moment before replying. "Mr. Sutton, I presume." Earl nodded. "That's right." Tom glanced behind Earl at the tractors filling the entrance and then back at him. "Can you tell me what this is about?" Earl didn't raise his voice or gesture dramatically. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out two folded documents: the warranty revocation letter and the inspection report from 2 years earlier. He handed them to Tom and said simply, "This is what it's about." Tom unfolded the papers and began reading while standing there in the middle of the parking lot. Behind Earl, the farmers gradually began drifting closer, not crowding, not surrounding the manager, just stepping forward until a quiet line of men stood several feet behind Earl Sutton. Raymond Hollis walked up from his tractor and stopped on Earl's left side. Harold Simmons stepped up on his right. Others joined them in silence. Tom finished reading the revocation notice first. Then he looked at the original inspection report from when the warranty had been purchased. He read it more slowly the second time. The document described the hydraulic system as entirely stock at the time the warranty was written. Tom lowered the paper slightly and looked at Earl. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Earl answered immediately. "From your dealership in Lexington 2 years ago when I bought the extended warranty." Tom looked back down at the report again. The meaning of the two documents sitting in his hands was obvious. If the system had been documented as stock 2 years earlier and Earl had not modified it since, then the inspection claiming an aftermarket component could not be correct. Tom lifted his head and glanced over Earl's shoulder at the line of farmers behind him. 84 tractors sat parked across the entrance, engines silent, the owners standing calmly beside them waiting for whatever came next. For the first time that morning, Tom fully understood the scale of the situation he was standing in. This wasn't a protest organized online. It wasn't a handful of angry customers. It was an entire network of farmers who had driven across 4 counties because one of their own had been accused of something they believed was false. Tom folded the documents again slowly, thinking through the next step. He already knew one thing. This was not a situation he could resolve alone in the parking lot. And every passing minute increased the chance that someone driving by on Highway 70 would film the scene and send it somewhere the company would notice very quickly. Tom looked at Earl again and said carefully, "I'm going to need to make a few calls." Earl nodded once. "You should." Tom Adcock stepped a few yards away from the line of farmers and pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket. He already knew the first call had to go to the dealership in Lexington, the place where the inspection report had been written. He dialed the service manager directly. Phil Garrett answered on the second ring with the voice of someone who had been expecting trouble ever since Harold Simmons called him the previous Friday. "Phil," Tom said, keeping his voice low but direct, "I'm standing outside the regional service center in Jackson with 84 tractors blocking every entrance to the building." There was a pause on the other end. Not surprise exactly. More like confirmation that the situation Phil had been hoping might pass quietly had now arrived in the most visible way possible. Tom continued before Phil could answer. "Earl Sutton is here. He's holding 2 documents. One is the warranty revocation notice your dealership triggered. The other is the inspection report from when he purchased the warranty 2 years ago, documenting his hydraulic system as entirely stock." Another silence followed, this one longer. Phil finally spoke. "Tom, our technician documented an aftermarket valve during inspection." Tom didn't argue. "Then you understand the problem," he said calmly. "Because the paperwork in my hand says there wasn't one 2 years ago." Phil inhaled slowly. "Which technician wrote the current report?" Tom asked, even though he already knew the name from the file attached to the revocation letter. "Marcus Webb," Phil said. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, not out of frustration, but calculation. "Have you spoken to him this morning?" Phil asked. "Not yet," Tom said. "And I'm not going to until we figure out what we're looking at." Phil didn't answer immediately. Tom added one more piece of information before ending the call. "There are 84 tractors out here, Phil. Every entrance to this building is blocked." Then he hung up. The second call Tom made went to Nashville, to the Regional Warranty Administration office. Carol Britton answered after 2 rings. Tom explained the situation in under a minute. "Earl Sutton, revoked warranty. Original inspection report documenting a stock system. 84 tractors blocking the Jackson Service Center entrance. Carol didn't interrupt. When Tom finished, she asked only 2 questions. Do the documents contradict each other? Yes. And are the tractors still there? All of them. Carol exhaled slowly. Then this isn't just a service issue anymore, she said. You need someone from regional leadership. Tom was already dialing the 3rd number before the call ended. Robert Calloway was in Nashville attending a meeting when his phone vibrated on the conference table. He saw Tom Adcock's name and stepped out of the room to answer it, because Tom was not the type to call during a meeting unless something had gone very wrong. Robert, Tom said the moment the line connected, I need you to hear this whole situation before you respond. Robert leaned against the hallway wall and listened as Tom described the scene outside the service center. 84 tractors parked across every entrance. Farmers standing quietly beside their machines. Earl Sutton holding 2 documents that appeared to contradict the dealership's inspection finding. When Tom finished, Robert asked 3 short questions. How many tractors? 84. Every entrance blocked. Yes. Robert paused for half a second before asking the 3rd. Is there media present? Tom glanced toward the highway where 2 cars had pulled onto the shoulder, and someone stood outside, holding a phone up toward the line of tractors. Not yet, Tom said carefully, but there will be. Robert didn't hesitate. Don't say anything to anyone until I get there, he said. I'm leaving Nashville now. Tom nodded, even though Robert couldn't see him. Understood. When the call ended, Tom slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked back toward Earl Sutton. The farmer standing behind Earl watched quietly as he approached. Tom stopped a few feet away and said, Someone from regional leadership is driving down from Nashville. I'd ask you to be patient. Earl nodded once. I've been patient for 3 weeks, he replied. I can manage another 2 hours. Tom accepted the answer with a small nod and stepped back toward the building entrance where a handful of employees still stood watching through the glass. Outside, the farmers returned to the quiet conversations they had been having earlier. Raymond Hollis leaned against the front tire of his tractor and spoke with a farmer from Henderson County about the corn harvest running late that season. Harold Simmons stood beside Earl and looked out over the rows of machines stretching across the driveway. No one seemed restless. No one talked about leaving. The atmosphere had the strange calm of a situation that had already passed the point where anyone needed to argue. The tractors were there. The documents were in Earl's pocket. The only remaining step was for the right person to acknowledge what they showed. Time passed slowly, but without tension. Some farmers walked a few steps across the pavement to stretch their legs. Others stayed beside their tractors, hands tucked into jacket pockets against the cool November morning. Passing drivers slowed to look, some pulling over briefly to take pictures before continuing down Highway 70. Inside the building, the employees watched through the windows, speaking quietly among themselves. They had never seen anything like this in the company's regional service history. At 9:47 a.m., Dar Company SUV pulled onto the shoulder of the highway because the driveway remained blocked by tractors. The driver stepped out and closed the door quickly before walking toward the service center entrance with the focused pace of someone who had spent the drive preparing for exactly one conversation. Robert Calloway stopped a few feet in front of Earl Sutton. Mr. Sutton, he said, extending his hand. Earl shook it once. That's right. Robert looked past him at the rows of tractors stretching across the entrance, and then back at the farmer standing calmly in front of him. I understand you have some documents for me, Robert said. Earl reached into his jacket pocket and handed them over without a word. Robert unfolded the first page and read it carefully. Then he read the second. The farmers standing behind Earl didn't speak while he did. They simply watched. Robert read the original inspection report a second time before lowering the paper slightly. This report, he said slowly, documents your hydraulic system as unmodified when the warranty was purchased. Earl nodded. That's correct. Robert lifted the revocation notice. An inspection conducted recently claims the presence of an aftermarket component in that same system. Earl nodded again. That's what it claims. Robert looked down at the papers once more before speaking the sentence that everyone standing there already understood. Those two findings cannot both be accurate. Earl didn't answer because he didn't need to. The quiet that followed felt different from the earlier silence. It carried the weight of a conclusion already reached. Robert folded the papers again and looked directly at Earl Sutton. "Mr. Sutton," he said clearly enough that the farmers standing behind him could hear, "I owe you an apology." Robert Calloway did not rush the moment after he said it. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Sutton." He didn't soften the words or bury them inside corporate language. He said them plainly, the way a man says something he intends to stand behind. The farmers standing behind Earl heard it clearly. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. They simply remained where they were, quiet, waiting to see what came next. Because apologies by themselves did not repair hydraulic systems, and they did not erase a warranty revocation letter. Robert looked down again at the two documents in his hands, then back at Earl. "This original inspection report documents your hydraulic system as unmodified at the time your extended warranty was written," he said. Earl nodded once. "That's correct." Robert lifted the revocation notice slightly. "And the current inspection claims an aftermarket component in that same system." Earl's answer was calm. "That's what it says." Robert held both papers together for a moment and then said something that made the situation unmistakably clear. "Those two findings cannot both be accurate." Earl didn't argue because there was nothing left to argue. Robert turned slightly toward Tom Adcock, who had been standing nearby listening. "Tom," he said quietly, "we're going to resolve this immediately." Tom nodded. Robert stepped a few feet away and made another call, this time directly back to Nashville. Carol Britton answered again, already expecting the update. Robert summarized the situation quickly. Earl Sutton's documentation confirmed the system had been stock when the warranty was issued. The current inspection finding was inconsistent with that documentation, and 84 tractors were still parked across the entrance to the regional service center. Carol listened and said only one thing. "Do you want the reinstatement authorized?" Robert replied without hesitation. "Yes, immediately." Carol said she would send written confirmation within minutes. Robert ended the call and walked back toward Earl. "Your warranty is being reinstated," he said. "You'll have confirmation in writing shortly." Earl nodded, but didn't celebrate. He had spent 3 weeks waiting for the company to acknowledge what he already knew, and patience had taught him that nothing was finished until the paperwork matched the words. Robert seemed to understand that. He turned again to Tom. "We'll print the confirmation as soon as it arrives," he said. Then he looked back at Earl. "Your repair will be covered." Earl thanked him with a small nod. Around them, the farmers remained still, listening but not interrupting. The atmosphere had changed slightly now. The tension that had hung quietly over the parking lot earlier had eased, replaced by the sense that the outcome was finally moving in the direction everyone standing there believed it should have moved from the beginning. 20 minutes passed before Tom Adcock's phone vibrated with an incoming email. He opened it immediately, scanned the message, and then walked into the building to print the document. When he returned a minute later, he handed the paper directly to Earl Sutton. "This confirms the reinstatement," Tom said. Earl unfolded it carefully and read every line. The warranty coverage on the hydraulic system had been fully restored. The revocation had been withdrawn. The repair would proceed under the terms of the original extended warranty. Earl folded the paper again and placed it back inside his jacket pocket beside the other two documents, the original inspection report and the revocation notice that had started everything. For a moment, he stood there with all three papers together, the entire arc of the last 3 weeks represented in a few sheets of paper. First the claim that something had been wrong, then the proof that it hadn't, and finally the correction that had taken 84 tractors to produce. Earl turned slowly toward the farmers standing behind him. He didn't make a speech. He didn't thank them one by one. He simply nodded once. That was enough. Raymond Hollis was the first to walk back toward his tractor. Harold Simmons followed a few steps behind him. Others turned and headed toward their machines as well. Engines started one after another across the driveway. The quiet of the parking lot replaced by the low mechanical rumble of 84 tractors coming back to life. One by one, the machines pulled forward and out onto Highway 70, clearing the entrance to the service center the same calm way they had arrived earlier that morning. Robert Calloway watched them leave beside Earl. After the last tractor rolled away and the driveway stood open again, Robert spoke. "Mr. Sutton, I want to understand how this happened." Earl shrugged slightly. "I expect you do." Robert nodded. "The technician who wrote the inspection report, Marcus Webb, has been with the Lexington dealership for 4 years," he said. "We're going to review exactly what happened during that inspection." Earl listened without interrupting. Robert continued, "And I want you to hear this directly from me. This will not end with your warranty being reinstated." Earl looked at him. Robert's tone was firm now. "There will be a full investigation of the dealership's inspection practices." Earl nodded once. "I appreciate that." Robert hesitated a moment before asking something else. "Mr. Sutton," he said, "I need to ask you one more thing." Earl waited. Robert gestured slightly toward the highway where the tractors had disappeared. "How did 84 farmers end up here this morning without a single social media post or news story beforehand?" Earl answered simply. "People called each other." Robert raised an eyebrow. "In 5 days." Earl nodded. "When the reason is right," he said, 5 days is enough." Robert looked out toward the road again, clearly impressed despite the seriousness of the situation. "I've been in this industry for more than 20 years, he said slowly, "and I've never seen anything like this." Earl gave a small smile. "I hope you don't see it again," he said. Robert understood the meaning immediately. Situations like this only happen when something has gone badly wrong. He extended his hand again. Earl shook it once more, and then walked back to his pickup truck parked along the highway shoulder. The drive home to Parsons took the same 40 minutes it had taken the morning he visited the dealership in Lexington weeks earlier. Only this time the problem that had followed him home had finally been settled. 6 weeks later, the investigation Robert Calloway promised reached its conclusion. John Deere's internal compliance team reviewed the dealership's service records and interviewed the technicians involved in the inspection of Earl Sutton's tractor. The company did not release every detail publicly, but the outcome was clear. Marcus Webb, the technician who had written the report claiming an unauthorized modification, was terminated. Kyle Brennan, the service advisor who presented the inspection findings without verifying the evidence, was also dismissed. The dealership's service manager, Phil Garrett, lost his position as well. The dealership itself had its authorized service certification suspended while the company reviewed its inspection procedures over the previous 3 years. Earl learned about the results in a letter sent from Robert Calloway's office in December. He read the letter at the same kitchen table where he had first laid out the 2 inspection reports weeks earlier. When he finished reading, he folded the letter and placed it in the same desk drawer beside the other documents. The hydraulic leak on his John Deere 6130 was repaired under warranty at a different authorized dealership later that month. The repair took 1 day. The paperwork was simple. When the technician finished the work, he asked Earl something he had clearly been curious about. "Is it true there were 84 tractors out there that morning?" Earl nodded. "That's right." The technician shook his head in amazement. "All because someone called someone else?" Earl smiled slightly. "That's all it was," he said. Then he added the quiet truth that explained the entire story better than anything else. "Out here, that's how things get done.